On the morning of August 17, 1943, precisely 22 minutes before 8 o'clock, Technical Sergeant James McKenna found himself positioned beneath the portside wing of a Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighter aircraft. The location was Dobodura airfield, situated deep within New Guinea's hostile terrain. McKenna's attention remained fixed on his assigned aviator as the young man completed his pre-flight preparations for what would likely become a one-way journey into the hostile skies. The flyer in question was a 23-year-old officer named Lieutenant Robert Hayes, whose combat record reflected merely 6 operational sorties, with not a single confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed. Intelligence reports indicated that Imperial Japanese forces had dispatched 18 Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters, with explicit orders to eliminate the American morning reconnaissance patrol. Hayes would be vectoring directly toward this formidable intercepting force. McKenna's experience maintaining Lightning fighters spanned 8 intensive months. His knowledge of these machines had grown comprehensive and intimate. The P-38 represented revolutionary design thinking with its twin-engine configuration, distinctive dual-boom architecture, exceptional velocity in level flight, and devastating effectiveness at elevated altitudes. Yet this formidable warbird harbored a single catastrophic weakness that was systematically eliminating American pilots with horrifying regularity. The Lightning simply could not execute turning maneuvers with the same agility as the Zero. The Japanese fighter possessed superior characteristics in terms of weight reduction and maneuverability. It could complete a full horizontal rotation in approximately half the duration required by the American aircraft. In aerial combat situations, this performance differential meant the distinction between survival and death. Official American tactical doctrine explicitly prohibited P-38 pilots from attempting turning engagements with Zero fighters. The guidance emphasized avoiding any attempts to outmaneuver the Japanese aircraft. Instead, pilots were instructed to exploit their advantages in velocity and altitude. The prescribed technique involved diving attacks, firing weapons, and immediately climbing back to safety. The strategy centered on hit-and-run tactics designed to prevent entrapment in turning battles. Hayes had attempted implementing this doctrine across 5 previous missions. The results had proven consistently unsuccessful. The Zero pilots demonstrated exceptional tactical awareness. They skillfully baited American flyers into turning fights, then exploited their superior turning radius to position themselves advantageously on the American fighters' tails, ultimately achieving kill shots. The 5th Air Force had documented the loss of 37 Lightning fighters during the preceding 6-week period. The majority of these losses occurred after pilots became trapped in turning engagements, from which they could not successfully disengage. McKenna had witnessed an excessive number of aviators perish. These were exceptional individuals, though in reality many were barely more than children. They would climb confidently into their P-38 cockpits each morning, and subsequently return either in coffins or fail to return at all. The official training documentation attributed these failures to pilot error. Flight instructors insisted these aviators were failing to adhere to established doctrine. However, McKenna possessed a more accurate understanding of the situation. The fundamental problem was not the pilots themselves but rather the aircraft's control cable system. The Lightning's aileron control cables followed a complex routing through the twin tail booms toward the rear fuselage section, then traveled forward through pulley systems to reach the wing-mounted control surfaces. This cable arrangement contained slack. The measurement was minimal, perhaps 3/8 of an inch at maximum deflection. Nevertheless, this seemingly insignificant amount of looseness created a measurable delay between the pilot's stick input and the actual aileron response. During high-velocity flight operations, this delay remained inconsequential. However, during low-speed hard-turning maneuvers, that fractional second delay represented the difference between successfully rolling inside a Zero's turning circle and being shot from the sky. McKenna had raised this concern with the engineering officer approximately 2 months previously. The officer's response indicated that cable tension measurements fell within acceptable specifications. Factory tolerance standards permitted this degree of slack. Modifying the configuration would invalidate the aircraft warranty. Furthermore, no field-level maintenance technician possessed authorization to alter flight control systems. Such modifications required engineering approval directly from Lockheed Corporation, and Lockheed's facilities were located 7,000 miles distant in California. Consequently, McKenna made a decision that violated every regulation contained within the Army Air Force. Maintenance manual. He obtained a section of piano wire from a damaged aircraft, cut it to a 6-inch length, fashioned it into a Z-shaped configuration, and installed it as a tensioning device on Lieutenant Hayes' portside aileron control cable. The unauthorized modification required 8 minutes to complete. It added precisely 4/10 of 1 pound of tension to the cable system. It eliminated the slack entirely. Nobody detected the alteration. The inspection crew conducting their morning checks did not verify cable tension that day. Their attention focused on engine lubrication levels and ammunition loading. McKenna maintained complete silence regarding his actions. He observed as Hayes taxied toward the active runway, watched as the fighter departed the airfield, and continued watching until the P-38 vanished into the morning atmosphere, heading toward the Japanese fighter formation. The events that would unfold during the following 17 minutes would fundamentally transform how every Lightning fighter in the Pacific Theater operated. The initial pilot McKenna lost to a zero engagement was Lieutenant David Chen. The date was July 9, 1943. Chen had been stationed in the combat theater for merely 3 weeks. McKenna had performed maintenance on his assigned aircraft every morning. Their conversations frequently touched on California. Chen hailed from Sacramento while McKenna called Long Beach home. Both men had worked on automobiles prior to the war. Chen departed at 6:15 in the morning on a fighter sweep mission overlay. He returned 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes penetrating his port boom and an account of a zero that had maneuvered inside his turning circle. Chen described attempting to roll out and dive away as the manual prescribed, but the aircraft felt sluggish in its response, as though a noticeable lag existed between his control inputs and the airplane's actual roll response. The zero nearly destroyed him. His survival was solely attributable to his wingman shooting the pursuing zero off his tail. McKenna examined the bullet damage carefully. The holes formed a tight grouping. The pattern indicated perfect deflection shooting. The zero pilot had led Chen's aircraft with remarkable precision, correctly anticipating exactly where Chen's airplane would position itself. This level of accuracy should have been impossible if Chen had executed a hard roll, an immediate dive, unless the aircraft had delayed just long enough to allow the zero pilot to establish the correct lead angle. Chen never flew operational missions again. His damaged aircraft was transported back to the depot facility for repairs. McKenna never encountered him subsequently. 3 weeks later, intelligence reports indicated Chen had been killed while flying a different P-38 over Rabaul. The circumstances were identical, caught in a turning engagement, unable to roll out with sufficient rapidity. The second pilot lost was Captain William Morrison. Morrison served as a flight leader with extensive experience, and 11 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed. His knowledge of the P-38 was comprehensive. He understood its limitations thoroughly. His flying discipline was exemplary. On August 3rd, Morrison's flight intercepted 8 Zero fighters at 12,000 feet altitude over Oro Bay. Morrison secured 1 confirmed kill on the initial attack pass. He maneuvered for another engagement opportunity. 2 Zeros reversed direction and engaged him. McKenna heard the radio communications afterward. Morrison attempted an inverted roll and split-test escape maneuver. He transmitted that his controls felt unresponsive and mushy. The Zeros maintained contact throughout his defensive maneuver and shot him down at 4,000 feet. Morrison's wingman reported that Morrison's aircraft appeared to be responding inadequately, as though Morrison was struggling against the controls. Morrison perished in the resulting crash. Morrison's assigned crew chief was a personal friend of McKenna's, an individual named Rodriguez who originated from Texas. Rodriguez remained convinced that Morrison's aircraft harbored some mechanical deficiency. He examined every system after recovery of the wreckage: engine settings, control surface rigging, cable tensions, every component measured within specification. Nothing indicated mechanical failure. The official investigation report concluded pilot error. Rodriguez rejected this finding. McKenna shared his skepticism. By mid-August, McKenna had witnessed 17 pilot fatalities. He knew some well. Most he had encountered only briefly during pre-flight inspections. However, he had performed maintenance on all their aircraft, signed their maintenance documentation, observed them taxi for departure, watched them take off. Some returned, others did not. The survivors consistently reported the same experience. The P-38 felt delayed in its response during aggressive maneuvering, as though a slight lag existed between control input and aircraft reaction. Most pilots assumed this was simply the aircraft's normal handling characteristics. Heavy fighters with large control surfaces could be expected to exhibit some delay. However, McKenna understood this was not normal behavior. He had physically felt that delay with his own hands while working on the control cables. That minuscule amount of slack in the system. He began paying careful attention to the sound the cables produced. When he tensioned them during maintenance procedures, a specific tone existed. A distinctive low vibration when plucked. Loose cables produced different acoustics than properly tensioned cables. McKenna could distinguish the difference audibly. Every P-38 on the flight line had cables that sounded slightly loose within specification, but loose nonetheless. He mentioned this observation to Rodriguez one evening following Morrison's death. Rodriguez inquired what could be done to address the issue. McKenna stated that nothing could be done officially, but unofficially a solution existed. It simply required violating regulations. That could result in both of them facing court-martial proceedings. The fundamental issue was not that American pilots lacked knowledge of proper tactics. They understood perfectly. Every briefing emphasized the doctrine. Every training flight drilled the procedures. Never engage zeros in turning fights. Exploit speed. Exploit altitude. Hit-and-run tactics exclusively. The doctrine was unambiguous. The problem was that actual combat rarely conformed to doctrine. Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been stationed in New Guinea for 2 months, 23 years of age, raised on a farm in Iowa. He had flown 6 combat missions and recorded 0 confirmed kills, not because his piloting skills were deficient, but because he adhered strictly to the rules, and the rules consistently positioned him in situations where obtaining a firing solution proved impossible. On his 3rd mission, Hayes dove on a 0 from altitude, accelerating to 400 miles per hour. Approaching from the sun as the manual prescribed, he acquired the 0 in his gun sight and began calculating deflection for lead. The 0 executed a snap roll to port and dove. Hayes attempted to follow. His P-38 rolled into the turn, but felt as though it was moving through a viscous medium. By the time his aircraft pointed where he intended, the 0 had vanished. Hayes recovered, climbing back to altitude. No weapons fired. His 4th mission proved worse. Hayes and his wingman engaged the zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes fired the initial burst, missing. The 0 reversed hard to starboard. Hayes rolled to follow. His wingman transmitted a warning about 2 additional zeros approaching. From above, Hayes attempted to roll level and dive away. The airplane responded, but slowly, just slowly enough that one of the diving zeros fired a 3-second burst into Hayes' starboard boom. 20mm cannon shells. They failed to penetrate, but they frightened Hayes severely enough that he disengaged and returned to base, with both engines producing smoke. On the 5th mission, Hayes witnessed his wingman's death. The wingman was Lieutenant Thomas Parker, 21 years of age, from Boston. They had completed training together. On August 14th, Parker became separated from the formation during a dogfight over Finchafane. 2 zeros positioned themselves on his tail. Parker attempted every defensive maneuver, hard rolls, reversals, scissors. The zeros maintained contact through every maneuver. Hayes heard Parker's radio transmissions requesting assistance, heard the terror in his voice, heard him state that his aircraft was not turning fast enough, heard the sound of cannon fire, heard Parker scream. Then silence. Hayes could not sleep that night. Neither could most of the squadron. Parker's bunk remained empty. His personal belongings were collected and shipped to his family. His P-38 was documented as a combat loss. The maintenance log noted no mechanical discrepancies. The official determination was pilot error during defensive maneuvering. McKenna had performed maintenance on Parker's aircraft the morning he died. Everything was perfect: engine timing, control surface alignment, cable tension within specification. The airplane was mechanically sound, but Parker was dead regardless, and McKenna understood why. That fraction of a second delay in the controls, that tiny amount of slack that the manual classified as acceptable, it had killed Parker just as it had killed Morrison and Chen and 14 others. The most disturbing aspect was the smell. Every morning McKenna worked in the maintenance area. The odors of aviation fuel and heated metal and hydraulic fluid filled his senses. It was the smell of aircraft preparing for combat. Some of those aircraft would return, others would not, and McKenna would be present the following morning experiencing the same smells. Working on additional aircraft, watching more pilots walk toward machines that could not respond quickly enough to preserve their lives. On the evening of August 16th, Hayes came to the maintenance area and located McKenna working on his assigned P-38. Hayes inquired whether there was anything McKenna could do to make the airplane roll more rapidly, anything whatsoever. Hayes stated he did not care whether it was regulation or not. He simply wanted a fighting chance. McKenna looked at Hayes and saw the fear, saw the desperation, saw a young man who understood he was going to die if something did not change. McKenna instructed Hayes to return in the morning. He would see what could be accomplished. McKenna worked alone that night. The maintenance hangar fell quiet after 2,300 hours. Most of the maintenance crew had retired to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumbling of generators and the buzzing of insects. Against the overhead lighting, the atmosphere smelled of engine lubricant and tropical humidity. He removed the inspection panel from Hayes' P-38 port boom. The metal retained warmth from the day's solar heating inside. The aileron control cable followed a path through multiple pulleys toward the tail section. McKenna grasped the cable with both hands and pulled, felt the slack, perhaps 3/8 of an inch of play before the tension engaged. His hands were covered in grease and his fingers ached from a full day of maintenance operations. But he could feel that slack clearly. It was incorrect. He knew it was incorrect. The piano wire originated from a salvaged P-38 that had executed a ground loop 2 weeks earlier. The aircraft was designated as scrap, but McKenna had removed useful components before it was transported to the depot, including a 6-inch section of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He had kept it in his tool bag without really understanding why. Now he understood. He sat on the hangar floor with the wire and a pair of pliers, bending it into a Z-shaped configuration. The wire was rigid, resisting the pliers. His hands slipped twice, cutting his thumb on the second attempt. The blood made the wire slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls and continued working. 8 minutes elapsed before he achieved the correct bend. The Z-shape would function as an inline tensioner, would add precisely enough preload to the cable to eliminate the slack. Installing it proved more difficult. The space inside the boom was constricted. McKenna had to work with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. The beam kept shifting. Shadows jumped across the cable system. His shoulder wedged against the boom structure. The metal edge cut into his arm. He could feel perspiration running down his back despite the night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction. His fingers fumbled with the clevis pin. Dropped it. Heard it bounce somewhere in the boom. Spent 5 minutes feeling around in the darkness until he located it. The entire time his heart was pounding. If the engineering officer discovered him performing unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he would face a court-martial, possibly a dishonorable discharge, perhaps imprisonment. But Hayes was going to die if McKenna did not take action. He inserted the piano wire tensioner between the cable end and the pulley, reconnected the cable. The fit was tight. He had to force the clevis pin through. When it finally seated, he tested the tension manually, pulling on the cable. No slack. The control surface moved immediately. Perfect. McKenna replaced the inspection panel, cleaned his tools, wiped the blood from the wire and his hands, and departed the hangar at 1:15 in the morning. The tropical night was humid and motionless. Somewhere in the distance, he heard aircraft engines. Japanese night raiders, probably. The sound made his stomach tighten. He had just modified a flight control system without authorization, used a non-standard component, violated at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed during flight, Hayes would crash and McKenna would be responsible for his death. However, should the modification prove successful, Hayes stood a chance at survival. McKenna retreated to his sleeping quarters, though sleep remained impossible. He spent the hours until sunrise staring upward at the ceiling overhead. At 6:30 in the morning, he made his way to the flight line and observed as the ground crew completed fueling operations and loaded armaments onto Hayes' aircraft. He watched Hayes emerge from his pre-flight briefing session and approach the cockpit. At precisely 42 minutes past 7 o'clock, Hayes commenced his takeoff roll. McKenna remained stationary on the flight line, his eyes tracking the P-38 as it climbed into the morning atmosphere. He observed it joining formation with 16 additional aircraft. He watched as the formation vectored northwest toward Japanese-controlled airspace. From that moment forward, the only option available to him was waiting. The aerial combat engagement commenced at 14 minutes past 8 in the morning. Hayes' four-ship flight of P-38s intercepted 9-0 fighters at 13,000 feet altitude. Over the Huon Gulf, the morning solar position was directly behind them, creating ideal conditions for a diving attack. Hayes occupied the number 3 position. His element leader transmitted the attack call. They rolled into their attack geometry. Hayes selected a Zero positioned at the rear of the enemy formation. He dove from altitude, accumulating velocity to 380 miles per hour. The Zero grew progressively larger within his gun sight. Hayes could distinguish the painted rising sun insignia on the fuselage. He could observe the pilot's head visible in the canopy. He depressed the trigger mechanism. The .450 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon erupted. Tracer rounds reached outward. Most projectiles missed their target. A few hits generated sparks as they impacted the Zero's wing. Insufficient damage. The Zero executed a snap roll to starboard, and Dove Hayes rolled to pursue. That precise moment brought the revelation. The airplane responded instantaneously. No delay existed. No lag occurred. The control stick moved and the aircraft rolled immediately. Hayes had never experienced his P-38 maneuvering like this. The sensation was as though the airplane had been anticipating his command and executed at the instant he issued it. He completed a 90-degree roll in what felt like half the typical duration. Got his nose pointed downward. The Zero remained directly within his sight picture. He fired again. 3-second burst. The rounds walked up the Zero's fuselage from tail section to cockpit. The Zero's engine detonated. Components separated and flew off. The aircraft rolled inverted and descended toward the jungle below, trailing black smoke. Hayes' inaugural confirmed kill. Though no time existed for celebration, his wingman transmitted a warning about Zeros diving from above. Hayes looked upward and saw 3 of them descending in a shallow dive, approaching rapidly. They had witnessed him shoot down their comrade. Now they sought retaliation. Hayes shoved the throttle, controls forward and initiated a climb. But the Zeros possessed superior velocity in the dive. They would reach him within seconds. His only option was reversing direction and fighting. Every instinct screamed at him to maintain his climb, to continue running. That was the established doctrine. But doctrine meant death today. He rolled hard to port and pulled. The P-38 snapped around unlike anything he had ever experienced. The nose came through the horizon. He saw the lead Zero. It was turning to follow him, but had not anticipated Hayes reversing that rapidly. The Zero was in a disadvantageous position. Exposed, Hayes pulled lead, fired, struck the Zero in the port wing root. The wing folded. The Zero tumbled to confirmed kills within 30 seconds. The other 2 Zeros attempted a scissors maneuver with him, alternating turns to force an overshoot. Hayes stayed with them. Every time they reversed direction, his P-38 snapped into the turn instantaneously. No delay. No struggling against the controls. The airplane executed exactly what he wanted the moment he wanted it. The experience was like flying an entirely different aircraft, as though someone had removed invisible weights from the control system. 1 Zero made a tactical error, reversed too aggressively, bled excessive speed. Hayes maneuvered inside his turn. Close range, perhaps 200 feet. He fired. Missing was impossible. The Zero disintegrated. Pieces of aircraft fell past Hayes' canopy. He felt the P-38 shudder as debris impacted his starboard boom. 3 confirmed kills. The 4th Zero fled. Hayes chose not to pursue. His fuel and ammunition remained low. He climbed back to altitude, reformed with what remained of his flight. They headed toward home base. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. When Hayes landed at Dobodura at 3 minutes past 9 in the morning, McKenna was positioned waiting on the flight line. Hayes shut down both engines and climbed out from the cockpit. His hands were trembling. His flight suit was saturated with perspiration. He walked directly to McKenna. Hayes spoke 2 words. It worked. What neither individual realized was that 6 other pilots had observed Hayes' engagement from altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell witnessed the entire fight from 15,000 feet. Mitchell was a flight leader assigned to the 475th Fighter Group. He had been observing Hayes' element engage the Zeros below when he noticed something unusual. Hayes' P-38 was rolling faster than any Lightning Mitchell had ever observed. The aircraft snapped through maneuvers as though it weighed half what it should. Mitchell knew every pilot in the theater, understood their skill levels. Hayes was competent, but not exceptionally skilled. Something was different about his airplane. Following landing, Mitchell located Hayes in the debriefing room. Hayes remained amplified on adrenaline, hands shaking as he completed the combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell inquired what was different. Hayes stated he did not know. His airplane simply responded better today, faster. Mitchell asked if maintenance had performed anything to the aircraft. Hayes said he should speak with Technical Sergeant McKenna. Mitchell located McKenna in the maintenance area 2 hours later. McKenna was working on a different P-38. His hands were black with grease. His coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked him directly what he had done to Hayes' airplane. McKenna looked at him for an extended moment, then explained. The piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized alteration to the flight control system. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When McKenna finished, Mitchell asked if he could apply the same modification to Mitchell's aircraft. McKenna stated yes, but Mitchell had to understand the risks. The modification was not approved, not tested. If something went wrong, both of them would face charges. Mitchell stated he did not care. He had lost 4 pilots in his flight during the past month, all caught in turning fights they could not escape. If there was something that could help them survive, he wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38. Same piano wire tensioner, same installation method. Mitchell flew it the next morning and returned enthusiastic about the improvement. The airplane rolled like a fighter instead of a truck. He told his wingman. The wingman told McKenna. He wanted the modification too. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft. Word spread through the squadron. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs if they had heard about the cable modification. Some crew chiefs refused, stated it was against regulations. Others were willing to attempt it. McKenna showed them how. Cut the piano wire. Bend it into a Z shape. Install it as an inline tensioner. Takes 8 minutes. Changes everything. The modification spread pilot to pilot and mechanic to mechanic. No official documentation. No engineering approval. Just whispered conversations in the ready room and maintenance area. Hayes shot down to additional zeros on August 22nd using the modified controls. Mitchell achieved 3 on August 25th. Other pilots started returning from missions with kills. The statistics were impossible to disregard. Lieutenant James Watkins was a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group stationed at Gusup. He heard about the modification from a pilot who transferred from Dobodura. Watkins was skeptical, but he attempted it on 1 aircraft. The pilot returned from the next mission with his first kill after 8 weeks of combat. Watkins modified for more aircraft. Other crew chiefs in the 49th started implementing it too. By early September, perhaps 40 P-38s in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at Dobodura noticed something was different, but could not determine what. Control cable tensions checked out during inspections. Because the crew chiefs removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew. The mechanics knew. Nobody informed the officers. The kill ratio started shifting. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost to P-38s for every 0 destroyed. In August, it was 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed. But officially, nobody understood what. Then the Japanese noticed. Japanese fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Flight reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that American P-38s were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly. The reports noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's top aces. 64 confirmed kills. He had been fighting American pilots since Pearl Harbor. On September 3, 1943, Sakai engaged a P-38 over Wewak. He used his standard tactic, drew the American into a turning fight, waited for the P-38 to begin its roll, then snapped his turn back the opposite direction to get inside the American's turning radius. Except the P-38 reversed with him. Sakai had executed this maneuver dozens of times. He knew exactly how long it took a P-38 to roll, knew the timing perfectly. But this P-38 rolled faster than it should have. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American acquired guns on him. Sakai had to dive away. He returned to base confused and frustrated. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans were not flying differently. They were still using the same tactics. But their aircraft were responding faster. Fractionally, but enough to matter. Enough to disrupt the timing that Japanese pilots had learned to exploit. Japanese intelligence attempted to determine what had changed. They examined wreckage from downed P-38s, found no obvious modifications. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they had been fighting for months. The engines were the same. The armament was the same. Nothing visible had changed. What the Japanese did not know was that the change was hidden inside the boom, a 6-inch piece of piano wire that resembled original equipment. Even if they had found it, they might not have understood its purpose. It was not a new weapon system, not a new engine, just a minor modification to control cable tension. But that minor modification was killing their pilots. By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing aircraft to P-38s at rates they had not seen since early in the war. The psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, Zero pilots had owned the sky in turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. That confidence was breaking down. Pilots who used to press attacks were becoming cautious, hesitant. They were not certain anymore if their tactics would work. The Japanese attempted to adapt. Some pilots stopped trying to engage in turning fights with P-38s, used hit-and-run tactics instead. But that meant surrendering their main advantage. The Zero's strength was maneuverability. Fighting like a P-38 meant fighting on American terms. And the P-38 was faster, more heavily armed, and could absorb more damage. Other pilots tried to compensate by being more aggressive, closing to shorter range before firing, taking more risks. But aggression without the ability to outrun the enemy just meant dying faster. Several experienced Japanese pilots were killed in September attempting tactics that had worked perfectly in July. The fundamental problem for Japanese pilots was that they were fighting an enemy they could not see. They knew something had changed, but they did not know what, and they could not determine how to counter it. You cannot develop tactics against a modification you do not know exists. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses in the same period were 22 aircraft. The ratio had reversed. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were killing Zeros at a better than 1-to-1 rate. Japanese command ordered pilots to avoid engaging P-38s unless they had significant numerical advantage. That order marked a turning point. The Zero had gone from hunter to hunted, and it all came down to a piece of piano wire that nobody was supposed to install. The modification never became official during the war. The Army Air Force Engineering Command learned about it in October 1943. When a maintenance inspector at Dobodura noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. He traced the discrepancies to the piano wire tensioners, wrote a report, sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification violated regulations, but it was working. Fighter squadrons using the modification had measurably better kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. The question was not whether the modification helped. The question was whether to punish the mechanics who had installed it without authorization, or quietly approve it after the fact. In November, Lockheed sent an engineering team to New Guinea to evaluate the modification. They tested it, measured the cable tension, calculated the stress loads, ran flight tests. Their conclusion was that the modification was safe and effective. It should have been part of the original design. Lockheed integrated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J model that entered production in December 1943, but McKenna never received official credit. No commendation, no medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation attributed the control system improvement to engineering analysis. McKenna's name did not appear anywhere. Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, returned to Iowa in 1945, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 children, worked as a crop duster for 37 years. He never forgot what McKenna had done. Every year on August 17th, Hayes called McKenna to thank him for saving his life. Mitchell also survived. He became a squadron commander, led his unit through the Philippines campaign, shot down 16 aircraft. After the war, he stayed in the Air Force, retired as a colonel in 1963. He told the story of McKenna's modification to every young maintenance officer he supervised, made certain they understood that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who see problems the engineers miss. McKenna stayed in the Army Air Force until 1946, returned to California, went back to working on automobiles, opened his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He worked on engines for 42 years, never talked much about the war. When people asked, he would say he was a mechanic, fixed airplanes, that is all. In 1991, a military historian researching P-38 modifications found references to the piano wire tensioner in maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian tracked down McKenna through veteran registries. McKenna was 73 years old by then, still working part-time in his garage. The historian asked him about the modification. McKenna confirmed the story, said it was not anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian estimated that the modification may have saved between 80 and 100 American pilots' lives, based on survival rate improvements in squadrons that used it. McKenna said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back. Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, the others. That was enough. James McKenna died in 2006 at age 88. He was buried in Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic. It did not mention the piano wire tensioner, did not mention that he had changed how American fighters flew, did not mention that he had broken regulations to save lives. His garage in Long Beach is still there, different owner now, but on the wall in the back office, there is a faded photograph, a young mechanic in coveralls standing next to a P-38 Lightning. The date written on the back is August 1943, New Guinea. That is how innovation actually happens in war, not through official channels or engineering committees, through sergeants and mechanics who see problems, find solutions, and do not wait for permission to save lives. These are the stories that deserve remembering because they reveal the truth about warfare. Victory does not always come from brilliant generals or advanced technology. Sometimes it comes from a skilled technician working alone in a darkened hangar, risking his career to save pilots he barely knew. Sometimes it comes from recognizing that regulations exist to serve the mission, not the other way around. Sometimes it comes from having the courage to break the rules when breaking them means keeping people alive.